Hello, and welcome back to Bigfoot Lake. Tonight we share a story from Wabanaki lore. The Wabanaki were a Native American tribe from northeast United States extending into Canada. This story was originally recorded in Nova Scotia in 1871. The title of this story is He Who Was Unborn, the Giant Killer. So with that being said, let's dive in to tonight's story. In olden times, there were giants in the woods, fierce and cruel giants. In the Micmac language, some were called Kukwesk. Their name means the ones who were always hungry. The Kukwesk were huge and hairy, and they were greatly feared, for they tracked and killed the people. Once a young Kukwesk saw a woman in the woods. He fell in love with her, even though she was a Micmac and not a giant. He wanted to marry her, but he was very worried about what his father would say when he heard of this. Still, the young giant knew he would have to talk it over with his father. "You can marry this woman of the people, but only on one condition, that I never, ever see her nor smell her," roared the grizzled old giant. "She must obey our laws. If she doesn't, then who knows what will happen." The young giant built a huge stone wigwam to hide his new wife in, and told her she must stay there so that his father would never see her. Every day the young Kukwesk set out to hunt, for he had to provide animal meat for his wife and her parents. But he also had to help in the tracking of the people. Soon the giant and his wife had a son. The young Kukwesk worried terribly that the food for his wife and his son would become mixed up with his food. Therefore, he hung his food in a pouch made of a bear gut, far apart from their food. "Never touch this," the young giant warned his wife and son every day as he left to go hunting. Every day he reminded them. Now his wife was pregnant again. One afternoon, as she lay resting, the little boy began to play with his bow and arrows. He grew restless in that stone wigwam and leaped about, knocking things over, shooting wildly with his bow. "Be careful," cried his mother. "Never shoot your little arrows at the bear gut pouch. That is your father's food. Stay away from it. You know better." Instead, defiantly, the little boy set his arrow, aimed, and let it fly. The arrow pierced the sack of food, and oil began to drip out. "Oh," moaned the boy's mother, "that is the end of us." Quickly, she set a birch bark bowl beneath the sack to catch the oil, trying to set things right. Meanwhile, out in the forest, the young Kukwesk sank to the ground. With his power, he could see what was happening at home. In moments, his giant strength was weakening. He knelt on the ground, resting his head on his bow, full of grief. At last he got to his feet and started home. Because he was so weak, it took him all day to walk back. He reached the stone wigwam and stumbled inside. "Wife, you should not have let this happen," he said sadly as he fell asleep. "You have broken your promise. Who knows what will happen now?" In the morning, he went to the wigwam of his parents, his mother and father Kukwesk. He bent his head and entered. There they sat, ugly, old, greasy, and hairy. "We know what your son has done," roared his father angrily. "Father," he said, "you may have my wife for food." Then he went deep into the forest. "Ah!" roared the old Kukwesk, full of rage and grief. The power of the giants had come upon him. He leaped up. He strode to the old stone wigwam, entered it, and killed the wife of his son, a woman of the people, He put her body on his toboggan and dragged it through the snow, stopping to throw her unborn child into the spring of water. There the unborn child floated, held up safely by the turtle person. Back at the wigwam, the older boy cried and cried. When his father returned from the woods, he said, "Father, Grandfather Kookwest came and killed my mother." The young giant sat down and held the boy and rocked him until he finally went to sleep. In the morning, his father said, "Go to the spring and bring us some fresh water." The little boy took the birch bark bowl and hurried along the snowy path to the spring. Green moss circled the warm water, melting the snow. There, floating in the water, the little boy saw a tiny child laughing at him. It was his brother. The older boy was overjoyed. "Come out and play with me," he cried happily. "It's all right, we're brothers." All day they played by the spring. However, when they heard the crashing sound of their father coming home through the woods, the little one returned to the water and hid. The older boy ran back to the stone wigwam and sat by the fire with his father that night. He asked, "Father, can you make me 2 little bows and little arrows?" So the father sat by the fire, making the bows and arrows for his son. The next morning, the boy took them to the spring. The little one was waiting for him and leaped from the water. Together, they played in the woods and they ran to the stone wigwam. In there, they made a mess, jumping, leaping, and throwing things around. When they heard the giant's heavy footsteps returning home, the little one took the bows and smashed them to bits. Then he ran back to the spring and jumped in, helped again by the turtle person. "What has happened here? Who has made this mess in the wigwam?" asked the giant. "Who has been here playing with you?" "It's my younger brother," said the boy. "He was thrown into the spring when Mother died, and he comes out to play with me, but he won't stay. He is wild. Whenever he hears you coming, he jumps back into the water. I would like him to stay, though," the boy continued. "I think if we collect many feathers of all kinds, he will want to stay and play with them." Therefore, the Kookwes, still mourning the loss of his wife and hoping to make his only son happy, went into the forest to collect feathers from birds' tails. When his father had a big fistful of them stuffed into his pouch, the older boy once again lured his brother into the wigwam to play. 3 times the little one came to play, but escaped and ran back to the spring when he heard the giant coming. However, the 4th time, the older boy caught him and held him tight, while the little one kicked and struggled to break free. The giant entered the wigwam, and the little boy began to cry. Quietly, the Kookwes sat down and held out a beautiful feather. The little boy snatched it and threw it in the fire, still crying. His father pulled out another from his pouch. Still, the little boy threw it in the fire. One after another, he threw each feather into the fire, crying and kicking and trying to escape. Finally, 1 feather was left. The Kookwes pulled it from his pouch slowly, hoping the little one would take it. It was a heron's feather, a tail feather, and he who was unborn took it, laughing. He loved the heron feather. Then the 3 of them lived together. The father brought the little one gifts from the woods each day for the boys to play with. But he who was unborn grew. He grew very fast and was full of power. One day, his father made him a bow, but when the unborn one pulled it, it broke at once because he was so strong. So he had to make his own bow, and that bow was 10 times stronger than any bow the people had. He led his brother to the spring. "Listen to me. I was not even born when our father let Grandfather Kookwes kill our mother," he said. "Yes," said the brother, "but she broke her promise. We touched the Kookwesk's food sack. Nevertheless, it was wrong. Come with me. Her death must be avenged." The brothers went into the woods and gathered load after load of birch bark. They carried all of the birch bark and placed it in and around the stone wigwam. When their father, the giant Kookwesk, cannibal giant, returned that night, he was tired. He lay down by the fire and fell asleep. Then he who was unborn set fire to all the birch bark and burned the stone wigwam. When the fire had cooled, he took 2 big stones, one from the spring and one from the doorway, and gathered up his father's bones, the power of the cannibal giant still in them. Then he ground the giant's bones to powder. The powder of the big bones he tossed into the air, and the dust became flies. The powder from the smaller bones became mosquitoes, and the powder from the tiniest bones became sandflies. His father was dust blowing, nothing more. "And now," said he who was unborn, "we shall free the people from the awful Kookwesk, the cannibal giants. Come," he said to his brother, "let us go." So that's our story for tonight from Wabanaki folklore. I hope you've enjoyed the story, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight here at Bigfoot Lake, and we'll see you on the next.